They didn't even wait until I left the room to start laughing. "Dad, you really think people care about stories like that anymore?" My son leaned back in his chair, swirling the ice in his glass. The clink was sharp, deliberate. Across from him, my daughter hid a smile behind her wine glass, but her eyes betrayed the amusement. I still had my pen in my hand, the notebook open in front of me. 10 minutes ago, I'd been reading aloud a new piece, something I'd worked on all week, polishing the details, making sure the rhythm felt right. A story about my father's fishing trips in the summer of '69, the kind of tale that smells like wood smoke and lake water, that lingers after it's told. "People don't want this old-fashioned stuff," my daughter added, almost gently. "It's nice, but it's not relevant. The world's moved on." Her husband didn't look up from his phone, but I caught the smirk. "Yeah, Dad. Save it for the retirement home." The room was warm from the wood stove, but I felt something cold slip under my skin. I glanced at the table I'd built myself 30 years ago, its surface scarred with the marks of family meals and late-night conversations. This table had held everything: celebrations, grief, plans for the future. And now it was the place where my children dissected my life's work like it was nothing but a relic. I closed the notebook slowly, careful not to let my fingers tremble. "I see. They thought that was the end of it." The moment I let go, moved on, accepted my stories were meaningless in the glare of their busy, modern lives. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I'd learned long ago that silence could be sharper than any insult. But when I drove home that night, their laughter still clinging to me like the smell of the wine they drank, I took out every notebook I'd kept for the past 20 years. Stacks of them, some with covers so worn they looked like they'd survived a storm. Inside, lives. Whole towns. The rustle of a neighbor's garden in the wind. The way the light shifted in the kitchen on winter mornings. They called it boring. I called it the truth. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I started typing before I even took off my coat. My fingers were stiff from the cold, but the words came fast, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. I didn't change much, just enough to make it fiction on paper. But anyone who knew us would recognize them instantly. My daughter's sharp laugh became a character's cutting remark. My son's smug grin turned into the smirk of a man who thought he was untouchable. Their quirks, their little cruelties, the things they thought no one noticed, I noticed. And I wrote every one of them down. I didn't write for them. Not at first. I wrote for me, for the part of myself they'd just dismissed, for the years of memories they'd reduced to irrelevant. Each night I sat at my desk, the house silent except for the tapping of the keys, and built a world from the bones of theirs. A world where arrogance had consequences, where small betrayals came back in ways no one expected. 3 months later, the manuscript was finished. I printed it out, holding the pages like a weight I wasn't sure I was ready to set down. I sent it to one publisher. Just one. I didn't expect a response. 2 weeks later, the email came. They wanted the book. Not just wanted it, they were excited about it. The advance was more money than I'd made in a year. But that wasn't what made my hands shake as I read the message again and again. It was the note at the end: "The characters feel so real. Almost like we've met them before." I said nothing to my family. Let them think I'd dropped the whole thing. At Sunday dinner, I sat in the same chair, listening to them talk about work, about the latest gadget, about how no one reads books anymore. 6 months later, they were standing in the kitchen when my face appeared on the evening news: "Local author's debut novel takes nation by storm." The anchor smiled as she read the title. My daughter's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. My son went pale. They'd read it by morning. And they'd know exactly who everyone was. The first text came before sunrise. "Daughter, is this supposed to be about us?" I didn't answer. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen as I poured it into the mug they'd once given me for Father's Day, "World's Best Dad." It felt almost funny now, the kind of joke only time could make. By the time I'd finished my first sip, the phone buzzed again. "Son, we need to talk. Today." The local paper had already arrived, damp with morning frost. My book's cover was splashed across the arts section, along with a headline that made me smile: "Old Stories, New Bite, a bestseller that hits close to home." The journalist had called the book deceptively warm, hiding a blade in every page. I couldn't have written a better description myself. By 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. My son stood there, shoulders tense, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. He didn't even say hello. "You made us into a joke." I stepped aside, motioning him in. He didn't move. "Everyone at work is talking about it. They think they're clever, asking me if I've ever been to that fishing cabin on Red Leaf Lake." "You think it's funny? Using our lives like this?" "Our lives?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Or just yours?" He opened his mouth, then shut it. The color rose in his cheeks. "It's humiliating." "It's fiction," I said calmly. "If people see themselves in it, that's their own reflection." He left without stepping inside. Gravel spat from under his tires as he sped away. I watched from the window until his car disappeared down the road. By noon, my daughter called. She skipped the pleasantries. "You need to pull it from print. That's not how publishing works. You could try. Tell them you changed your mind." I stirred my soup, letting her voice wash over me. She talked about damage, about how people were making connections, and asking questions. I thought about all the times she'd dismissed my writing as quaint background noise, something to be tolerated at family gatherings. "I'm not ashamed of what I wrote," I said when she finally stopped. "You should be." And she hung up. The silence afterward wasn't empty, it was full. Heavy. Like the air before a storm. That evening, I went for a walk through town. The bookstore's display window was dressed in autumn colors, my novel stacked neatly in the center, its cover facing the street. Inside, a young couple browsed the shelves, one of them holding a copy, smiling as they read a passage aloud. I knew the line. I knew exactly which character they were laughing about, and whose laugh I'd copied perfectly. Back home, I pulled out the old wooden box from my desk drawer. Inside were photographs, letters, clippings, the kind of things families think will stay buried in drawers forever. I'd kept them not out of sentiment, but because I understood something my children never did: truth has a long shelf life. They thought the book was the whole story. It wasn't even the first chapter. I poured another cup of coffee and sat at my desk. Outside, the wind rattled the last of the leaves from the maple in the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then fell silent. They wanted me to feel ashamed. Small. Controlled. Instead, I felt steady. Patient. The book was just my way of clearing my throat. The real story, the one they'd never see coming, was still waiting to be told. The email subject line was ordinary enough to look harmless: Rights Inquiry, Adaptation Clip Origins. I opened it anyway. A junior producer thanked me for allowing the internet clips that had teased passages from my book months before publication. He wanted to license the original files to use in a documentary pitch. Original files? I scrolled down. 3 embedded links. I clicked the first. My kitchen. My voice. A shaky phone camera peeking around the doorway while I read, unaware. Laughter muffled behind the lens. The caption in cheerful font: Dad's Nostalgia Hour, Try Not to Fall Asleep Challenge. My hand hovered over the pause button, but I forced myself to watch. The angle shifted to catch my face when I reached the line about the river jumping its banks in 82. Off-screen, my daughter whispered, "He does this thing with his eyes when he thinks he's profound." Someone snorted. The video cut to my son's hand miming a tiny violin. 2 million views. The date stamp was 6 months before my agent's first email. I clicked the second link. The same room, different night. A birthday cake cooling behind me, the frosting still wet. I was reading about a boy who returns a wallet he could have kept. Off screen, a whisper, imagine believing people like this still exist. The comments crawled by, cringe, grandpacore, low stakes bedtime. One said, I'd watch this if someone rewrote it without the dust. The third link was shorter. A clip of my hands leafing through a notebook while I searched for a paragraph. The caption, relic rummages for relics. Over it, a sparkle effect, a little coffin emoji. Their followers loved that one. They asked for more. I closed my laptop gently, because I didn't trust what my hands might do if I let them speak for me. So that was the truth I didn't know at the start. My bestseller had ridden into the world on rails they laid to mock me. Their laughter had been my marketing department. Their contempt had been my trailer. My phone buzzed on the table, buzzing again when I ignored it. Finally I turned it over. A family group chat I'd forgotten how to leave. The title made me smile without humor, Core 4. There had been 4 of us once. A new message bloomed. My daughter, too brisk for punctuation, we didn't mean harm. The videos were private at first. People just liked them. I scrolled up, years of birthdays and holiday logistics until the tone changed. Screenshots of my notebooks. A short clip of me reading on the porch, heavily filtered to look ridiculous. A poll, top 3 sleepy dad tropes. The options were my own habits. The winner was pauses like life owes him breath. Beneath that, a thread labeled brand plan. My son-in-law had posted a checklist. Register domain with dad's name, snag socials, lock title variants, pitch nostalgia podcast to sponsors once he softens. A week later, my son replied with a thumbs up and a draft logo, my face traced in a circle, beneath it the words Old Man Stories. They'd already purchased the URL. They'd already sent test emails from an address that used my name. And because they are competent in the ways of modern theft, they'd filed a provisional trademark for the book's title the day my pre-orders broke the small press record. I found the receipt in the thread. My daughter had written, just business. He'll thank us when it scales. I pushed my chair back and let the floorboards carry the old story of this house, where the scuffs came from, how many winters the wood had outlived. The wind at the window rattled the latch. My pulse steadied in time with it. I clicked open one more file in the chat. A screen recording of a spreadsheet. Revenue ideas. Rows of possible products, mugs, candles, faux vintage journals. In the notes, he'll want simple designs. Ignore. Nostalgia sells better sentimental. Out to the side, a column titled Leverage. Under it, bullet points, access to grandkids, limited. Ownership of domain, full. Control of narrative, medium. Leverage. They did not know I was reading. They did not understand that their neat little inventory had given me mine. I brewed tea I did not drink and sat at my desk while the kettle cooled. The wooden box of letters and photographs waited in the drawer, but I left it shut. I didn't need the past right now. I needed geometry, angles, leverage, the clean physics of weight and counterweight. I wrote a single email to the producer, those clips were recorded without my consent. The rights rest solely with me. If you've already spoken with anyone claiming otherwise, send details. I sent another to my publisher's legal team with links to the trademark filing and the domain registration. The subject line, bad faith. The body, consider this notice. Prepare injunctive relief and a press line about misappropriation. Also, please instruct marketing to stop approving family warms the heart angles. The heart is not warm. I turned off the lights and let the house darken around me. The quiet was not empty. It was a room filling with water, rising toward the ceiling, waiting for a window to break. The next morning, my son arrived with a folder under his arm and a smile that tried to pass for empathy. "We should control this," he said, before his coat was off. "People are confused. We can help shape your image." "My image," I repeated, as if trying on a new jacket. "The one you've been shaping for a year." His smile faltered. It was a joke that got out of hand. Jokes usually stop before the trademark office. He sat, spreading papers across my table. Contracts cobbled from the internet, full of empty reassurance. At the bottom of the top page, a line for my signature. License of name and likeness. Next to it, a percentage that would have insulted a stranger. "I'm offering to take work off your plate," he said, tapping the number. "We can all benefit. Family." I didn't look at the papers. I looked at his hands. There is a language in how a person arranges fingers around a pen, in how they gesture when the truth is slippery. His hands were careful now, performative care, a man trying to look harmless while he moves something sharp across the table. "The videos," I said quietly. "You recorded them. You posted them." He flinched, nearly invisible. "We thought it would calibrate you. Show you what the audience needs. Mock me into modernity. Don't make this ugly," he said. "It's business." I slid the folder back without reading a line. "No. Think about the grandchildren," he added, and there it was, the reflex they believed would always work. "They're getting questions at school. This could make it easier. Tell them to say the truth," I said. "That their parents taught them how to steal softly." He stood, anger mixing with embarrassment. He gathered the papers, but one contract slid free and hung half off the table, the signature line hovering like a trap. He left without picking it up. The moment the door clicked, I photographed every page and emailed them to legal. I copied the family chat links, the domain receipts, the trademark filing. Then I called the teacher I'd worked with on the library fundraiser last winter, a quiet woman who knew how to pass a rumor like a note in class without anyone seeing the hand that wrote it. By late afternoon, my publisher's attorney called back. Her voice was crisp, interested. "We'll file tonight. We'll get your name back. Expect noise." I thanked her and sat in the dim kitchen until the light failed. On the counter, my old notebooks lay stacked like unmapped hills. This was the first twist, I realized, but not the last. They'd weaponized my silence for a year. I'd only just started learning how to aim. That night, I drafted a statement and didn't send it. I drafted an apology and didn't mean it. I drafted a question and left it where it belonged, unanswered. Instead, I opened a new document and wrote a single line. They mistook my patience for permission. The filings went through faster than I expected. By Thursday morning, the trademark they'd claimed in my book's title was flagged for dispute, the domain name locked under investigation, and my publisher had sent a politely brutal cease and desist letter to every email address associated with them. The responses were predictable. "My daughter, you're blowing this out of proportion." "My son, lawyers." "Seriously?" "My son-in-law, we could have handled this as a family." Family. They kept using that word like it was a shield, forgetting it was the very thing they'd weaponized against me. By noon, the first ripple hit the outside world. A local arts blog published a short piece about the strange legal battle behind this year's most unexpected bestseller. They quoted unnamed sources saying there was tension between the author and close relatives over creative control. The piece ended with a screenshot of my book in the shop window beside a printed notice, "Signed copies available, until they're not." By evening, a bigger outlet picked it up. Then another. Then 3 more. The comment sections were a mix of speculation, amateur sleuthing, and blunt recognition. "That character is totally her daughter." "The fishing trip chapter. That's his son, 100%. Who cares if it's based on them? It's still the best book I've read this year." The more they tried to downplay it, the more oxygen they gave it. I didn't post a thing. I didn't need to. Silence was its own kind of noise. On Friday morning, the knock came. Not the hesitant knock of a neighbor. This was sharp, businesslike. When I opened the door, a courier handed me an envelope thick enough to stand on its own. Inside, a petition for a temporary restraining order. They wanted to stop sales of my book until authorship disputes were resolved. They weren't just trying to own my name. They were trying to erase my work entirely. The first real anger hit then, not the quiet, useful kind, but the kind that wanted to break something. I set the papers down and walked the perimeter of my kitchen, twice, until I could think in straight lines again. If they wanted escalation, they'd get it. That afternoon, I called in a favor from someone who owed me one, a former student who now ran PR damage control for a political campaign. I gave him nothing more than the facts and a single instruction: don't make me look good. Make them look busy. By Sunday, it was working. A lifestyle site ran a piece on family influencers who over-monetized personal relationships. My daughter's name appeared halfway down, attached to a list of ill-fated projects that had over-promised and under-delivered. My son's short-lived podcast was mentioned too, in the same breath as failed branding attempts. The calls and texts came faster. The tone had shifted from scolding to pleading. My son asked to meet. My daughter suggested a private conversation, no lawyers. My son-in-law wrote 3 paragraphs about misunderstandings and regret before sliding in a request to pause the public stuff. They didn't understand that the public stuff was just background noise. The real work was happening elsewhere. Because here's what they didn't know: the wooden box in my drawer, the one they'd never seen open, didn't just hold old letters and photographs. It held receipts. Actual receipts. Emails printed and time-stamped. Messages from the years before the book, when they'd pulled smaller stunts, thinking I hadn't noticed. Little betrayals that never made it into fiction because they weren't worth the page space. Individually, they were petty. Together, they told a story no one could laugh off. On Monday morning, I visited my publisher's office in person for the first time. We sat in the conference room, the city's winter light spilling across the long table, and I slid the box toward the legal team. If they want a fight, I said, I want to make sure we're fighting with a full deck. One of the lawyers lifted the lid, skimmed the first few items, and let out a low whistle. This isn't just leverage, she said. This is artillery. Exactly. When I left the building, I passed a newsstand. My book was on the front page of the arts section again, but this time the headline was bigger: when fiction hits too close to home. Beneath it, a subhead: family feud over bestseller spills into legal and public arenas. The photo they'd used wasn't one I'd posed for. It was from a book signing the previous month, me caught mid-signature, looking up at someone out of frame. I remembered the moment: a stranger had just told me the book reminded her of her own father. That's why my expression in the photo wasn't pride exactly, or joy. It was recognition. I bought the paper and folded it under my arm. They'd wanted to own my image. They'd wanted to dictate my narrative. Now my image was everywhere, and the narrative wasn't theirs to control. It was the trademark records that gave them away. I'd asked my publisher's legal team for the originals, paper copies, not the digital scans, because paper has a way of telling truths that pixels hide. Handwriting in the margins. Coffee stains. Dates that don't match signatures. That's when I saw it. The filing for the trademark on my book's title wasn't dated after publication, as I'd assumed. It was dated 6 months before my publisher even announced the release. Months before I'd told my family the book existed. Which meant, they'd known. They'd known I was writing it, known enough about its title to stake their claim, and had been quietly preparing their nets long before the first copy reached a shelf. I turned the pages slowly, not out of caution but to keep my hand steady. My daughter's signature appeared on the filing. My son's email address was listed as the point of contact. And there, scribbled in blue pen across the bottom, was a note from my son-in-law to himself: launch phase after buzz, target Q3 for merch drop. Buzz. The kind you can't buy, the kind you only get when a secret comes out in the wrong light. I leaned back in my chair, letting the cold air from the half-open window brush my neck. 6 months before. That was the real betrayal, not their laughter when I read to them, not the clips they'd posted to mock me, not even the legal ambush. It was that they had planned it. They hadn't stumbled into this like opportunists grabbing a fallen wallet. They'd watched me carry it for years, counted the bills through the leather, and started drawing up shopping lists before I'd even decided to open it. I thought about the chance Sunday dinner invitation last year. The way my daughter had insisted on pouring my wine herself. How my son had asked oddly pointed questions about how you come up with names for characters. At the time, I'd thought it was some clumsy attempt at connection. It wasn't. It was recon. When you realize someone's been smiling at you while taking measurements for your coffin, something shifts. I spent the next 3 days in deliberate invisibility. No calls. No texts. No posts. I wanted them to think the storm had passed, that the legal push was all I had. People make mistakes when they think they've survived the worst. While they were busy convincing themselves I'd quieted down, I was in the city. A coffee with an old colleague who now worked at one of the bigger publishing houses. A meeting with a podcaster whose audience loved stories about art, theft, and family. A discreet conversation with an editor at a national newspaper, the kind that runs Sunday features people talk about for weeks. Every person I spoke to got the same pitch: not a legal battle, not a PR fight, a human story. A slow, patient man whose own family tried to strip his work from him before it even had a chance to breathe. And here's the thing about real stories: they're impossible to fake without someone, somewhere, holding the proof. I had more than proof. I had handwriting. When I finally went home that Wednesday night, the answering machine's red light was pulsing like a heartbeat. 6 new messages. 3 were from my daughter, her voice veering between conciliatory and panicked. 2 were from my son, trying to sound calm but unable to hide the strain. The last was from my son-in-law, short and clipped: "We need to talk before this goes too far." I erased them all without listening twice. Instead, I opened the wooden box again, removed a single folded letter, and set it on the desk. It was from my late wife. Just one line written in her looping script: "Don't let them turn you into a supporting character." The next morning, I made my decision. They thought they were in a legal fight. They thought it was about control. They didn't know I'd already started writing my second book. And they were all in it. I didn't announce the second book. Not to my publisher, not to my agent, and certainly not to them. It wasn't going to appear on any production calendar they could monitor. This one would grow in the shadows, the way ivy climbs a wall, silent, steady, unstoppable. Every morning for the next month, I walked to the same corner cafe with a battered notebook that looked like it belonged to a man scribbling memoirs for no one in particular. In truth, the pages filled with carefully altered versions of the people who had spent the past year circling my work like vultures. The trick was in the disguises. I wasn't interested in another, almost them, portrait. I was building masks so convincing that strangers would think they were reading about someone else, until, a chapter later, the mask slipped just enough for recognition to cut. But writing was only half the work. The other half was preparation. First, I renewed the lease on my apartment without telling anyone. They'd assumed I would move now that the first book's royalties were coming in. Let them think I was distracted with real estate tours, it made me harder to pin down. Second, I met with my publisher's foreign rights department and quietly negotiated a limited edition overseas print run under a different title. The same book, a different name, one they didn't know to monitor. If they tried another trademark ambush, they'd find themselves chasing the wrong ghost. Third, I started speaking at events. Small ones at first, library readings, historical societies, independent bookshops. Places where no one expected drama but everyone had a phone in their pocket. I never mentioned my family by name, but I knew the way people would connect dots, the way local whispers find national ears if you feed them just enough to chew on. The legal team kept me updated. The injunction attempt had failed. The trademark was dead in the water. The domain name was transferred to me. 3 for 3. That's when I made my first overt move. I sent each of them a signed copy of the first book, personalized. My daughter's inscription read, "For the one who taught me that every smile has a motive." My son's, "For the man who taught me patience by never having any himself." My son-in-law's, "For the architect of unasked-for empires." They'd know those weren't compliments. They'd also know I'd signed in a way that made reselling them impossible without revealing the inscriptions. 2 days later, my phone rang. My daughter. "Is this supposed to be some kind of threat?" "No," I said. "It's a dedication." "You're not funny." "I didn't write it to be funny." Click. The second book kept growing. Each new chapter was sharper than the last, the kind of prose that left paper cuts. I wasn't writing for sales this time. I was writing for permanence. Fiction has a way of outliving fact, and I wanted their shadows on the page forever. Meanwhile, I planted small seeds. I told a trusted journalist about a surprising family backstory, tied to the bestseller. I left one of my annotated notebooks, just the right one, at a cafe where a certain blogger liked to work. I dropped a cryptic remark during a podcast interview about how some truths take longer to ripen than others. The responses were predictable: speculation online, a spike in search queries about my family, strangers reaching out with their own "I think I know who you meant" theories. They were starting to feel it, that slow tightening of the net they thought they'd set for me. Late one night, I received an email from my son. No greeting, no sign-off. Just, "What are you planning?" I read it twice before deleting it. Let him wonder. Because the truth was, I wasn't planning anymore. The plan was already moving, one quiet step at a time, and by the time they realized how far it had gone, they'd be too deep inside it to climb out. They thought the book tour was just marketing. It wasn't. Every city on my schedule was chosen for a reason: old acquaintances, buried connections, people who'd seen pieces of my family long before they learned to hide the seams. I wasn't just meeting readers, I was collecting testimony. At the third stop, a retired librarian pressed an envelope into my hand during the signing line. "Thought you might want this," she said softly. Inside, photocopies of overdue notice records from 30 years ago. My sister's name appeared 6 times, tied to book sheet "Forgotten, to return," 3 of them later found for sale at a flea market she ran. At another event, a former coworker of my son leaned in close after I signed her copy. "If you ever need someone to talk about what he did with the company card," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I hadn't asked for any of it. But people love to share when they sense their story will be told. And I knew exactly how to make use of these details without ever breaking a law. What my family didn't know was that while they'd been scrambling to contain the fallout from the first book, I'd already been feeding threads to a handful of investigative journalists, not about them directly, but about patterns of small cons within families. The kind of feature that starts broad and then narrows until only one set of faces fits the frame. The first article dropped mid-tour. It didn't name them, but the timing was perfect, released the morning I was scheduled for a primetime TV interview. By the time the cameras were on me, the headline was already trending: "The fiction that might not be fiction at all." The host smiled across the desk. "Your book has struck a nerve. Some say it's because people see themselves in it. Others say it's because they see you've written about real people." I didn't blink. "Fiction is a mirror," I said. If someone doesn't like what they see, they should ask themselves why they recognize the reflection. The clip went viral overnight. 3 days later, my daughter appeared at the back of a signing event. She didn't approach the table, just stood there, pale and rigid, until I finished. When the line was gone, she walked up and placed a folded sheet of paper in front of me. It was a printout of my second book's working draft. One chapter, nothing identifying, except that she had underlined a single sentence in red: "Some debts are paid in public." Her voice was low. "I know what you're doing." I met her stare. "Do you? You think you're clever, but you're not untouchable. Neither are you." She flinched, but not from the words. From the certainty behind them. After she left, I checked the draft file. Someone had accessed it 3 days earlier from an IP address I recognized. It matched the one in my son-in-law's business registry. They'd found a leak, but not the whole pipeline. Just enough to make them nervous. Good. Because here's what no one, not even my publisher, knew: the second book wasn't my only work in progress. I'd been building something else, part memoir, part dossier. Not for print. For safekeeping. For the moment when a single truth, placed in the right hands, could shatter their version of events forever. The midpoint had arrived, and I was no longer playing defense. They thought the clock was still running. They didn't know the buzzer had already sounded. The first open strike wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was a Tuesday morning when the magazine piece dropped, a double-page spread titled, "The Anatomy of a Family Brand Collapse." It never mentioned my book by name, never identified my relatives directly, but the timeline, the quotes, the anonymous sources, there was no mistaking who it was about. Half the quotes were theirs. They'd given them to lifestyle bloggers months earlier, back when they thought they were building a playful PR narrative: the eccentric dad, the charming but outdated stories, the modern kids helping him find relevance. They'd said those things on record, thinking they controlled the context. Now, those same words were printed beside expert commentary on exploitation, image manipulation, and the dangers of monetizing personal relationships without consent. I didn't leak the piece. I just made sure the right editor got the right research packet, every source, every link, neatly compiled in a folder marked "for background." By noon, their social media accounts were locked. By evening, the group chat lit up with messages they knew I'd read but wouldn't answer. "Did you do this? You need to fix this. We can't work like this." That last one almost made me laugh. Work. As if the thing they'd been doing to me counted as work. 2 days later, the panic began to show in public. My son posted a long thread about misunderstandings and false narratives, trying to frame himself as the victim of online speculation. The replies were merciless, quoting his own past words back at him. My daughter stayed silent, but a friend of hers went on a podcast to set the record straight and ended up confirming more than she denied. Meanwhile, I kept moving. At my next reading, I opened not with a chapter from the book, but with an essay I'd written just for the occasion. It was about trust, about how people rarely notice the small thefts until the big one arrives. I never named names, but the pauses, the phrasing, anyone following the story could see the shadows on the wall. The clip hit 1 million views in 2 days. That weekend, I gave my publisher the first half of the second book, not the full manuscript, just enough to start the design and marketing quietly. The working title, Inheritance Without Consent. The cover, stark, no illustration, just the title in heavy black type. I knew they'd see it. My daughter still had a friend inside the press world, and whispers travel fast. The point wasn't to surprise them anymore. The point was to let them watch it coming, step by step, powerless to stop it. The following Monday, a courier delivered a single envelope to my apartment. Inside, an unsigned letter. "Stop this now. We know things too." I read it once, then slid it into the wooden box with the others. They still didn't understand. Anything they knew about me, I'd already turned into fiction. Anything they could threaten, I'd already owned in print. Acceleration wasn't about speed. It was about inevitability. And from where I was sitting, their options were narrowing by the day. The night before the launch, I barely slept. Not from nerves, there was no uncertainty left in this. It was the kind of wakefulness that comes before a long-planned strike, when the pieces have all locked into place and the final move is only a formality. At 9 a.m., the press embargo lifted. Every outlet that had covered the first book now had the second on their front page: Inheritance Without Consent, pre-orders already sold out in 3 states, foreign rights bidding war underway. The subtitle was The Knife, a novel about the people who mistake blood for ownership. The photo they used wasn't from a staged shoot. It was one a journalist had taken at a small reading weeks earlier. Me at the podium, backlit by the old town hall's windows, had tilted in a way that made it impossible to tell if I was listening or judging. At 10 a.m., the first excerpt went live on a national magazine site. 3 chapters, each sharper than the last. The characters were fictional, but anyone who had followed the drama could trace the lineage. Little details, an unusual phrase, a specific gesture, an obscure family incident, made it clear these weren't imagined people. By noon, the phone started. Calls. Texts. Emails. "You can't do this. We'll sue. We'll tell them what you're really like." I replied to none. At 2 p.m., my publisher's legal team issued their own statement. The author asserts full ownership of all original material and will defend it without hesitation. That sentence was aimed at them, and they knew it. At 4 p.m., the final blow landed. The Sunday feature I'd been quietly feeding for months dropped online and hit print the next morning. It was long, 6,000 words, and meticulous. It traced a year-long timeline of attempted brand theft, supported by public records, archived posts, and offhand comments they'd made themselves. Every claim was backed by a receipt. Names weren't redacted. They couldn't call it fiction. They couldn't call it coincidence. By evening, their social media was gone. Entire accounts vanished. Their websites went dark. An email from my son-in-law's business address bounced back with "no longer in service." And yet, that wasn't the victory. The real payoff was quieter. It came 3 days later, at a signing in my own hometown. The line wound around the block, faces I knew and faces I didn't. Halfway through, an elderly man approached with a first edition of the first book and the new one tucked under his arm. He leaned close after I signed them both. "They thought they could own you," he said. "You reminded them they never did." That night, I walked home through the cold and realized I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I wasn't wondering what they'd try next. They had no next. I'd taken it from them. The story was mine again. Forever. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell in thick, heavy silence, covering the streets like a clean page. From my apartment window, I watched the city slow, the noise muffled, the edges blurred. It suited the moment. Their names had vanished from headlines. The few who still tried to defend them online found themselves drowned out by a tide of readers quoting lines from my books, lines that made their justification sound smaller with every repost. I'd heard, indirectly, that my daughter had taken a leave from her job. My son had stepped back from his business. My son-in-law was in talks to sell what was left of his company. No one mentioned the 3 of them together anymore. The wooden box was lighter now. I'd kept a few pieces, letters, clippings, fragments of the life before, but most had gone to the journalists or the lawyers, leaving behind only what I might someday use again. Not for revenge. For record. The second book climbed faster than the first. Reviewers called it unsparing, merciless, a love letter to boundaries. Book clubs dissected it. Professors assigned it. Strangers sent messages that began with "I thought I was alone until I read this." Every reading ended the same way. Someone would linger until the line was gone, step forward, and ask the question they couldn't help themselves from asking: did it really happen? I always gave the same answer. It's a story. Then I'd smile just enough for them to wonder. One evening, long after the tour ended, I walked past the bookstore where it had all begun, my novel in the autumn window, the young couple laughing at a passage they recognized. The display was different now, both books side by side, the covers facing the street like two parts of the same verdict. I stood there for a long time, letting the cold bite through my gloves, before I went inside. I bought a copy of each and signed them both at the counter without being asked. The cashier, barely old enough to have her own shelves, looked confused. "Why buy your own books?" she asked. "Because I can," I said. Outside, the snow was still falling, erasing footsteps almost as soon as they were made. I thought about how quickly people vanish when their story is no longer being told. Some disappear quietly. Others are buried in plain sight, under words that outlive them. I pulled my coat tighter, turned away from the lighted windows, and started walking. They would never see me coming again, because there was nothing left to see.